The first, I guess, the first point of entrance into your presentation is to first of all acknowledge that I think it's great what you've started, and sorry, just one moment. Sorry, just one.
Okay.
Sorry, just a background noise. Yes, you obviously started at a macro level, and you've recognised that out of the different areas of Melbourne and the greater Melbourne area, which, you know, as you have shown on the slide here, that which, you know, people born overseas and you know, et cetera, and then you've moved then to a region, and you were starting to tell a story. That's, yes, exactly, in terms of China, you were starting to tell a story then, leading us to then what I was looking for then was, you know, the argument as to why you've chosen the site that you've chosen. But I have to say, if you go to the next slide.
Okay.
Yes, now you're looking in terms of municipalities. So I was then really starting to follow you. Here, go to the next slide. And then you went to site location, and this as a slide doesn't actually give you know, specific information on it. So
yeah.
And that's,
so then we do the site analysis.
Yes. So the link between the previous slide and this slide, in terms of, you know, exactly where is that? Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So I can see that that's northeast of the CBD, and although you verbally might say something, the information has to be on the image itself.
Okay.
So it's not, yeah. So just that there's that linking. You're telling a story across a number of slides, and you're going from that initial greater macro, which is an unusual way to start in terms of an image of, you know, that data with regards to people, you know, the different sections of Melbourne and the people who are born overseas. It's an unusual way to start a presentation. Usually you would start with the tradition, I suppose. But because we're talking about site today, I can understand why you've done it this way, and that's okay, because other groups have done that too. But then you need to be clear about then that you're taking that information from one slide to another, and that you're leading us carefully into this point here. So you know, you need to then start to put together an argument, other than just in terms of location and demographic. Why that particular site?
Okay.
So that information needs to be on the link between these two slides. So if you go to the next slide.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So here, for example, you've got a north point, which is good, and then you've got the zones: parks, commercial areas, and residential areas. But there's no street names. So,
so we also need to write the street name.
Yeah, look, it's just because, you know, some level of information which just keeps us linking from the previous slide, if you know what I mean. At some point you will jump off this, because then you will then start to focus on, like, for example, from this scale of information, then you will go obviously down again to the specifics of your site, and then you broaden from within that. But, you know, then you have to do the analysis component, so or the contextual component, you know, that you know, from that. So you need to have information on this slide with regard to the streets and the surrounding area, even just where those major points are. If you go to the next slide.
Okay. Here.
Yes, which is what you've done here. See, there's still no street names.
Yeah, it's also without the street name. Yeah. We do the tram station and the bus route and the bicycle routes here to say this site is accessible.
Yes, which is also part of this. But for most people who live in Melbourne, they're going to orient themselves. I mean, even within this, where's your subject site?
Okay.
Have you got it identified? Can you show me even just using the, yes. So this is to do then with the contour, which obviously is really good. You need to know with regard to runoff and if you're terracing or whatever it is that you're doing with your design. But in terms of the actual, I got my video on, with the actual kind of definition of your site, subject site, within that greater region. You've got it circled and you've brought it out as a scale, but that's showing contour. But the actual location of the site, the boundaries, the size, etc., etc. If you go to the next slide.
Next one.
So you immediately then go into prevailing winds. Do you know what I mean? So
yeah.
there's a sort of there's information that's missing off those previous slides. So by the time we get to here, we don't have an understanding of where the site actually is, how big it is, what are the street names around it, the things that you would discuss before you get to prevailing winds. So, overlooking shadow diagrams, even as I said in my email out, even if you make an informed decision because you can't access the site. One group, for example, did winter and summer solstice on their site. And even if it's not quite correct, it's enough to show that the site is, in their case, the site is going to be completely covered in shadow during winter. So that's going to affect the decisions they make about planting. So, to get to that level of detail, you have to kind of, given us enough over here. So street names, et cetera, shadowing, access to the site, just some information about the site, the area, the size, the orientation, how you think the site, links into the streets and so on and so forth. In regard to this slide here, there's no information on it other than that you've said prevailing winds. So you need to have some, we need to be able to understand this as an image. So are you suggesting that those concentric circles relate to a certain something? There's obviously a range that goes from this to this, or do you know what I mean? I'm having to then interpret this as a diagram, and I may be interpreting it incorrectly.
Yeah.
So you need to give me some tools, or whoever is looking at your presentation, you need to give us some tools by which we can understand what is actually going on in this image. Now, I could say to you, well, if I had to make an educated guess on this, you're suggesting that the prevailing winds come from direct north, and they are considerable. But is that related to something that changes over the course of a year? Is it? How does it relate to the existing features? Is it because there is, a forest there? Is it because there is a lake there? How do I know how significant those prevailing breezes or winds are with regard to the impact on your site?
Okay.
Can you go to the next slide?
Next is about Linen Garden.
Okay, so there's also, I think it's you've identified the key species of plants, seasonal plants. Is this? I didn't quite catch. My notes don't say here. I've got a question mark. That is this the species of flowers that are within your tradition, or these are the species of flowers that are here in Melbourne?
It's not in Melbourne. It's in China, and which is always used in Linen Garden.
Okay, So that information is also missing on your slide, which is why we're doing this now, to give you a chance to then add in, the information that you need. And then you've looked at flowers.
So we need to add the name of the flower.
Well, there's
we
that.
have done that since
But it's also then just as an image. If you put that slide up in front of another student, not in our group, they won't know what it relates to.
Okay.
Do you know what I mean? It doesn't have any reference points in terms of, this is, and is it regional to China? Are these species regional within China, or is it et cetera, et cetera? And that's the part that then I guess I'm asking for in regard to precedence. But you've shown precedence last, so I would probably change the order a little bit, and I'll bring some of your precedence forward. And you also have information there that is missing as well. So, but we'll get to that because they're the slides that you show next. I'm intrigued as to why you showed flowers, but the next slide immediately after this, I was then expecting you to this one. I was expecting you to show tree species, or like if you're going to bundle up flowers as one slide, do you then bundle up significant tree species? So that change of scale from flower to shrub to tree. Do you know what I mean? If you're going to put flowers together, then where are the other significant species referenced?
We are trying to do the things to do some case study, like to do the section and analysis that the plant's organization.
Exactly, which is even more relevant then. See this image here, you have the banyan tree at the bottom, and you have a garden rockery as well, and you have a bamboo palm. So there's something other than flowers here. So what I'm saying, I suppose, is if you're going to give us a reference with the flowers,
okay.
I would suggest that you do the same thing with the tree and the same thing with, like, do you know what I mean? Those different scales.
I know that. I will try doing the flower like the landscape page.
Yeah, I just think it's that's either that or you put the collection over a couple of pages, so you have the trees as a table of drawings and information. You have the significant trees that you've identified, the significant flowers, and the significant shrubbery that you've identified, and you could tabulate that up in terms of whether that's seasonal. You just go, okay, spring across the top, and then significant tree, significant shrub, significant flowers, and then you go down from there. That might be another way of doing it. Or as you've done already, you put the flowers all together, and then you put the trees all together, and the shrubbery all together. And this level of information is probably a little bit premature, only in as much as that you haven't laid out the kind of the relationship between the case study or case studies that you've identified in the tradition, whichever gardens they happened to be, and what is it about?
In Guangzhou.
Is that here?
This garden is in Guangzhou, which named Korean.
Except that if you're going to look at a case study, it has to be. You would be wanting to look at the garden as a plan in some particular way. So you get an overall kind of understanding of the layout of that garden, and then what parts or devices from within that you are specifically interested in, and then you go down to this particular level of detail, if you know what I mean.
Okay.
Yeah.
What's your next slide?
Next is
yeah. So this is why they're a little bit out of order. So this has to come, I think, before you get to the planting kind of ideas. And you need actually references that there you have on the right, they need to be actually named, but they also need to be looked at in a little bit more detail as a sort of a series of sequences. You know, in terms of how Greg mentions how you know, where your access points are into that garden, if there's more than one or if it's one and you're taken through a very specific sequence. Understanding that as a garden layout first.
Okay.
If you know what I mean? Just if it's in terms of, yeah, so you're then able to set up the kind of the idea of why this is important, why is it relevant to the ideas that you're interested in, and then you go down to the level of detail that you showed before.
Oh.
Yeah. So then if you go to the next slide beyond the layout methods, same here as well. So if they are taken from that garden that you've shown in the image before, then you need another slide that actually identifies those points on the plan. So this borrowed view, for example, that you've got showing here on the right as an image, where is that in the garden experience?
Okay.
And the same with the frame views. And then you link those as part of a sequence as how you're moving through that garden experience, because your garden is also going to be moved through as a sequence of experiences.
Yeah.
What's your next slide?
It's
more, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
yeah.
all.
Yeah. So, there's just, yes. So I think that's, there's a little bit of information missing off some of the, from the slides themselves, but then there are some slides that are missing that link the two of them together. So you need now to really focus on giving information about your site specifically. So we need a site plan. We need to have some level of idea of how big it is. So, you know, it's, this dimension, what are the buildings or things around it in more detail. Photographs, if you can, of the existing conditions. If you can't access the site, then see what you can get from Google Earth, etc.
Okay.
Yeah.
And as I said, the amenities around the site, it's not, you're still working in regard to site information. From what you've shown today, you're working at a macro level. So you've got to then go from that, still within the idea of a site, down to a drawing that shows a site plan itself. Before then, you take us into, the actual design garden interests that you have.
Okay.
Does the other group want to comment and ask questions here?
Yeah, just have a bit comments on the. Can you please just go back to the? I remember there's a top view about the layout methods or layout strategy. That page.
This one.
Yeah, and I think you've already passed it. This one, yeah. So it's great to have those kind of different layout strategies, but I'm just wondering. So how do you guys plan to allocate or play around with the different types of strategies? How do you actually allocate them to different spots? For example, to create the journey, to create the story of your concept. For example, yeah, what I'm saying is that I can see the difference of. It's very interesting to have different kinds of plan layouts, but what's the next step to, for example, how do you allocate them? How do you actually implement them to match with your concept? For example, the first diagram. So what is the actual relationship between this particular type of layouts? What's the relationship between this and your concept? I think it would be interesting to see more linkage between those kind of things.
Yeah, I agree with you. We analyzed the three traditional Chinese garden, and Actually, we can't find like the strong concept about the layout in Lingnan Garden, but we just abstract some like the buildings surrounding the environment, like the landscape, and for now we're not sure how can we apply it into our concept. Yes, we maybe think about a lot later.
Just on that particular slide there, for example, there's nothing on that as a slide that gives evidence as to anything about which tradition it's coming from at all. So yes, it's really important to be very clear, particularly when you are trying to extrapolate from a tradition something like what you're calling a layout method, or compositional device, or master planning. That what is it? Where is it? What is it? When was it? So it situates us within an awareness of all that information. I could, for example, look at that and say, well, the drawings on the left could be really from any tradition that, any of the traditions that students are looking at, Chinese, Korean, Japanese, and they've all got, layouts like that. But then the images you've got on the right are clearly of particular gardens and buildings. So, I think take those, if they are two different case studies that you've identified as relevant for your design, I would take some time and actually give some more information about those two case studies in more detail. So, as I said, Google Earth, I think, has been used successfully by other students in other groups, just even to show, where these gardens are located and, roughly what they look like with respect to what's water, what's open space, what's treed, what's buildings, etc., etc. And then, then you start to make some, decisions and analysis from there for yourself on what you think might be going on in those gardens. Greg obviously has provided some information with regard to Chinese gardens that is of assistance here, the three key gardens. So I would look at that and link those two together, and then make some decisions on what you feel is important for you.
Yes.
All right.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So taking this forward for next week, I think you need to just fill in the blanks here with this particular level of detail.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And then you need to obviously you start to move forward into materials and so on. But this, you need to do this part really before you do anything else, because you're trying to build on this part of your presentation and moving towards the interim presentations in a few weeks. All right?
Okay.
Okay, good. You have things to do. Excellent. All right, so could I ask group 4?
Yep.